Welcome back to another Diablo 4 video. So, quite a bit here in my stream lately, people have been asking me what I think the strongest Druid build will be at endgame. And I think that's going to be a Werewolf Tornado build. Now, you can do something very similar to this with Lightning Storm, and keep in mind, this is all theory crafting. Until we get to play the build in action, we're not going to know the specifics of what may need to be changed here. Also, there may be uniques, legendaries, and just things about the game that we don't know about or will be different on the final version on release. Now, this build does require a specific unique to work. So if you don't have that unique, this version of Tornado will not work. So if you're not looking to speculate on builds before the release of the game, this video may not be for you, but if you are, let's get into the build. So first up, let's talk about Tornado. So it reads, conjure a swirling tornado that deals damage. Now, a couple things to keep in mind here. The lucky hit chance was 33%, they reduced it to 8%. But one of the things that makes Tornado very powerful is one cast of Tornado can hit the same enemy multiple times. So I think that's partially why they reduced the lucky hit chance, although I think this is pretty low. This should probably be maybe 15%, somewhere in the middle of where it's at now and where it was. And this may factor into the build, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, because we are doing some things where we need to be proccing lucky hits. And then you also get Enhanced Tornado, which gives you a 20% chance to spawn an additional tornado when you cast it. And then finally, Raging Tornado gives a chance to apply Vulnerable. So the unique that we're going to be running is Tempest Roar. So this is a helmet. On lucky hit, storm skills have up to a 25% chance to grant Force Spirit. This isn't really the part that we care about that much. That's a nice benefit, but the main thing is your base storm skills, which Tornado is a storm skill, are now also werewolf skills. So this allows us to synergize the build with both storm and werewolf. So the idea here is that we're going to get to a point where we don't need a basic skill anymore. As you can see, I don't have a basic skill on my bar there, because we're going to have so much resource cost reduction and some things proccing like this lucky hit giving us spirit back. I also wanted to quickly mention that Mad Wolf's Glee chess piece is probably going to be your best in slot here. It's going to give you +2 ranks to all your werewolf skills, and everything we're running is going to be a werewolf skill in this build. I just didn't want to overload the build with too many uniques. It's kind of already asking a lot, even just to have the Tempest Roar more than likely. But yeah, keep that in mind. The other big Tornado legendary aspect is Storm Chaser's aspect. Tornado will seek up to 3 targets. And then you can either put this on an amulet or a two-handed weapon to increase that target count. This is very important for the build. Without it, Tornado kind of just goes all over the place. So one of the main things that I think will make this so powerful is Grizzly Rage. So that may seem kind of strange because this typically turns you into a dire werebear. But with the dire wolf's aspect, it actually turns you into a dire werewolf. So you gain movement speed, and then instead of damage reduction, which you normally get with Grizzly Rage, you get spirit cost reduction instead, up to 50%. And then also kills will heal you for 10% of your maximum life. So this is also something you could put on an amulet. In the beta, I actually had this on an amulet, which reduced the spirit cost to 75%. I would imagine there's some sort of diminishing returns on spirit cost reduction. So something to keep in mind, when you go into dire werewolf form, you're only going to be able to use storm skills and werewolf skills on your bar. So I've picked abilities that will be able to be used in that form, and we're trying to stay in that form basically all the time. What we want to do is, as soon as Grizzly Rage is over, it's off of cooldown, and we can recast it. And Debilitating Roar is actually going to be a werewolf skill in this build, which we'll go over here in a little bit. So just keep that in mind too. That's why that's there. But we have a few things going on here. So Grizzly Rage itself is a 50-second cooldown. It lasts for 10 seconds, and then baseline kills will extend the duration by 1 second up to 10 seconds. So we're at 20 seconds now. You've got Aspect of the Rampaging Werebeast, that if you were to put it on a two-handed weapon, this will increase the duration of Grizzly Rage by 10 seconds. Now, the 5 seconds may be enough, and we can put it on a different gear slot. We'll come back to this in a minute, but I just want to talk about how long we can extend the duration of Grizzly Rage. You've also got the the potential for Calamity, which extends the duration of your ultimate skills by 25%. Now, I would imagine this factors in before the extra seconds you get from kills from Grizzly Rage, so we could extend the duration of Grizzly Rage to 35 seconds. Now, something that I know for sure is that when you're in Grizzly Rage form, the cooldown of Grizzly Rage does tick down, even while you're in the form. But what I don't know is if Calm Before the Storm will work to reduce the cooldown while you're in the form. If it does, this is what will enable us to recast Grizzly Rage as soon as we come out of the form and basically have 100% uptime on that form. So that'll remain to be seen. We're going to have to test it. But let's talk about all the other really powerful things we have going on while being in Grizzly Rage. So we've already talked about the resource cost reduction and the movement speed and the healing. Grizzly Rage itself gives you 20% bonus damage. And we're not getting the damage reduction that's getting replaced by the spirit cost reduction. But this damage bonus is increased by 3% each second while in this form. Then while we're in Grizzly Rage, we're unstoppable, which means we cannot be crowd controlled. We're also going to fortify for 8% of our base life per second. And then the other really powerful thing is with Aspect of the Rampaging Werebeast, critical strikes with Grizzly Rage increase your critical strike damage by 10% for the duration. So because of the stacking critical strike damage and the stacking damage the longer you're in the form, it may make sense even still to take Calamity and Calm Before the Storm if Calm Before the Storm does work while we're in the form. And so the idea is that we're going to run Mighty Storm's Aspect, which means the Earth and Might key passive also applies to your Storm skills. So the way that works, it's typically only for Earth skills, but it's on Lucky Hit. Damaging enemies with, this will be Storm skills, has up to a 5% chance to restore all of your spirit and cause your attacks to be guaranteed critical strikes for 5 seconds. This is increased by 10% for critical strikes, and 10% if the target is stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. And this may be, that last part of that might be a reason why Lightning Storm is viable as well for this. It'll be easier to proc this because you're immobilizing so much with Lightning Storm builds. But that's why I said the 8% lucky hit chance on Tornado could potentially be somewhat of a problem with Earth and Might. We're just going to have to get lucky hit chance on gear. And just remember that lucky hit chance on Tornado is low at 8%, but again, it is hitting multiple times. You're getting multiple chances to proc a lucky hit every time the Tornado hits something. But this is insanely powerful. I mean, restoring all of our spirit is nuts. And I don't even know if that part's going to matter that much. If we're able to stay in dire werewolf form all the time and reduce our spirit costs by that much, then you may not even need to restore all of your spirit with Earth and Might to keep the build going without a generator. But really the big thing that matters here is just guaranteeing crits. And I think that with being able to just spam the tornadoes, not worrying about casting a basic skill whatsoever, and we're getting some attack speed and some other things in this build. You know, tornadoes potentially spawning 2 at one time when you cast it, all that stuff going on. I think we can have a pretty high chance of keeping Earth and Might up, as long as we can get a decent amount of lucky hit chance on our gear to go with the tornado. So let's talk about some other crit synergies we have going on too. So since our storm skills are going to benefit from werewolf passives and werewolf buffs, we'll be able to run Toxic Claws. Critical strikes with werewolf skills deal 23% of their base damage as poisoning damage over 4 seconds. And this will actually be considerable damage, and we're also going to get to run in Venom for just another 30% additional critical strike damage as well. So as long as we're critting, we're going to poison, which means we're also going to be slowing enemies, and that will enable potentially Nature's Reach. This is up to 18% increased damage to distant enemies if they are slowed, stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. And again, we're slowing with the poison. Now, I'm not a gigantic fan of passives like this, where you're trying to be a set distance away from enemies, and there's some things in this build that are going to be kind of anti-synergistic with this, like Hurricane and some things like that. It may end up being that it's not worth running this, but it is a massive damage increase if you can make it work. So let's talk more about the rest of the skills. So we are running Hurricane. So Hurricane is mainly only here for a debuff and potentially another way to proc lucky hits. But again, if you're trying to be a set distance away from enemies, it's kind of tough to run this. Now, this isn't going to be up all the time, so maybe the play style is when this is up, you do get kind of right up in melee range or close to it, and try to get this to proc your Earthen Might and some other lucky hit stuff, and then when it's on cooldown, back up and kind of stay away. I mean, even being in melee range, with the way Tornado works, it's going to go seek out enemies that are distant from you to get that other passive to proc for you. So then we're also running Enhanced Hurricane, which slows, and then Savage Hurricane, which is going to reduce our damage taken. You could also go for the vulnerable chance on Hurricane, but I think our Tornado applying Hurricane will be enough. Another option would be to just drop Hurricane completely and throw 1 point into Shred for a movement ability, because that first attack on Shred now will dash towards the target. So that's potentially an option. The spirit cost isn't going to really matter. This gives you more mobility. So we're going to run 3 defensives. So one of them just being 1 point in Cyclone Armor. So this has been changed a bit. It's not giving you anywhere near as much non-physical damage reduction. It's at 10%. It only goes up by 1% per point spent. So we're just putting 1 point in. We're also going to be running Aspect of Cyclonic Force, which is also going to give us physical damage reduction from Cyclone Armor. So then, from there, we're going to be running Blood Howl. So this is going to be a 20% heal. The big reason why Blood Howl is good, though, is because of Enhanced Blood Howl. Kills reduce the cooldown of this by 1 second. So while you're running through a dungeon, killing enemies quickly, this is going to be off cooldown constantly. Then we're also going to get 15% attack speed for 4 seconds. So then we're running Debilitating Roar. And again, like I said, if you're in dire werewolf form, you can only use Storm and Werewolf abilities. So the way we're able to run this is with the aspect of the Dark Howl. Debilitating Roar is now a werewolf skill. In addition, Debilitating Roar will immobilize poisoned enemies for 2 to 4 seconds. So points in Debilitating Roar reduce the cooldown, so we have max points in it to get it down to a 17.6 second cooldown. And then we're also running Enhanced Debilitating Roar, which fortifies you, and then Preserving Debilitating Roar heals you. And that legendary effect, immobilizing enemies that are poisoned, will also help us proc Earthen Might. So with running 3 defensive abilities, it makes Vigilance extremely good. 15% damage reduction for 6 seconds after using a defensive skill. This will basically be up all of the time, especially with the cooldown reduction on Blood Howl. We're also running Ancestral Fortitude. This increases your non-physical resistances by 15%. I think this is better than putting more points into Cyclone Armor, because again, that only increases your non-physical resistances by 1% per point, whereas this is 5% per point. But if you were to put points into Cyclone Armor with the legendary effect, you are getting more physical resistance. So there may be an argument to be made there, but I think this is just better overall. We're also running 1 point in Heart of the Wild, and then 3 points into Wild Impulses. 15% increased damage for a 9% more spirit cost. Again, I don't think it's going to matter. I don't think that 9% more spirit will factor in once you get this build completely set up with all the resource cost reduction and potentially ways to generate spirit off of lucky hits and things like that. So then down here, we're just grabbing Defiance, more damage against elites, and then also Circle of Life, your nature magic skills that consume spirit heal you for 3% of your maximum life. This is one that we have a ton of different ways to heal in this build. We have this, we have Masochistic from our spirit boons. That's the Druid class mechanic, which we'll go over here in just a minute. We've got healing from Debilitating Roar. We have healing from Blood Howl. There's a lot going on there, so this may not be necessary. You could put this potentially somewhere else on the tree. And we do have some points in a little bit of this cluster here. So 1 point in Elemental Exposure, which on Lucky Hit will apply Vulnerable. 1 hit into Endless Tempest to increase the duration of Hurricane, but the main reason to put points into either of these is to get up to Bad Omen. Unlucky hit, 30% chance when dealing damage to a vulnerable, immobilized, or stunned enemy that a lightning bolt also hits, dealing 55% damage. Again, this is another one that's hard to know if this is actually going to be good in this build. This may be better in just a pure Lightning Storm build. We're just going to have to see how much lucky hit chance we can get on gear with the change to the lucky hit chance on Tornado. So let's take a look at the rest of the gear real quick. So already talked about that. We've got Accelerating Aspect. Critical strikes with core skills increase your attack speed by 25% for 3 seconds. If everything gets lined up properly, we should be critting all the time for just an extra 25% attack speed. And 25% attack speed, as long as we can spam our tornadoes, we don't have any issues with resources, will then get us more tornadoes out to then proc more lucky hits to kind of keep the machine going. So then you have Temerity. This is the other unique in the build. This isn't mandatory to it, but it should be extremely powerful. So effects that heal you beyond 100% life grant you a barrier up to 80% of your maximum life that lasts for 8 seconds. Like we already talked about, we have 4 different ways to heal in the build, so we should have a 80% barrier up pretty much all the time. So I think that's it for all of the gear and the skill tree. So let's talk about Spirit Boons. So if anybody that doesn't know about Spirit Boons, basically it's kind of an extension of the skill tree. You have 4 different animal aspects, and for each animal, you can pick one of their 4 abilities, and then you can specialize in one of the animals to pick 2. So right here, I'm specialized in snake to get 2 of the snake abilities. But they're really just passives. Now, they do things that you can't get on the skill tree, so that's nice. So for deer, we're grabbing Gift of the Stag for 10 max spirit. I'm also not entirely sure how much max spirit we're going to need. Basically, we just need to get into a sweet spot where we have enough spirit cost reduction, we have enough max spirit, and we have enough other ways to generate spirit to make sure that we don't run out of spirit before an Earth and Might proc happens. So this may not be necessary. We may be able to go into Wariness for just 10% reduced damage from elites. So then in Eagle, currently I have 30% critical strike damage. Now, I don't really want to try to have to scale crit chance whatsoever, but Earth and Might does proc more often off of crits. So it may be that we need to get some base crit chance in the build to make sure we're proccing Earth and Might. You could also go for 10% attack speed here. So then in Wolf, we currently have Energize. On lucky hit, dealing damage has up to a 15% chance to restore 10 spirit. Now again, the other option may be to just go for Calamity to increase the duration of our ultimate skills. So then in Snake, these first 2 we're not going to run. Calm Before the Storm will all depend on if it works while Grizzly Rage is active. If it does, this is absolutely in the build, no matter what. And then Masochistic should be really crazy. Critical strikes with shapeshifting skills heal you for 3% maximum life. So guaranteed crits from Earth and Might should just be healing like crazy with this. So I do have the Paragon board set up. Now this is kind of my first pass that I went through for Paragon for this build. I'm not 100% sure this is how I'm going to play it, but this is not bad. With this setup, you've got 4 boards plus your starting board. This is 5 glyphs and then 3 legendary nodes as well. So I'm not going to go too in depth on this. To be honest with you, I don't think the Paragon boards really change the play style too much of the build. It's just going to enhance the build more than anything else. I will say, just to quickly go over Constricting Tendrils, I don't know that this is actually going to be good enough to run, but if you can proc it enough, it is powerful, and it's also an immobilize for trying to proc Earth and Might. So that's kind of the reason that I took it. You could easily not go into that and go down to Heightened Malice down here instead. My problem with Heightened Malice is it's not going to be usable against bosses, which is where I think we're going to want the most damage. I think we're going to have no issue clearing dungeons for the most part. The bosses are the ones we're going to really want the damage against. Quickly show you the glyphs that I decided on. So we started with Earth and Sky, went into Werewolf, and then I think the most powerful glyph for this build is going to be Spirit. So the additional bonus, critical strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from you by 2% for 20 seconds up to 12%. And then for every 5 dexterity purchased within the range of the glyph, core skills deal 4% increased critical strike damage. And that's at level 1. So I believe it goes up to like close to 20% per 5 dex. Then we've got Exploit. And then I actually put Undaunted in here. So up to 10% damage reduction the more Fortify you have. And then increased damage while fortified. I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to be fortified in the build. We're going to have a lot of defense, a lot of healing, and we're just going to get Fortify every second while we're in Grizzly Rage, and Debilitating Roar will also give us Fortify. There's one other option we could potentially go to, and that's Bolster. Fortify for 10% of your maximum life when you use a defensive skill in the Spirit Boons. And again, 3 defensive skills, and one of them that's off cooldown all the time. We get a ton of Fortify out of Bolster. So anyways, guys, I think that about wraps it up. I will link the build in the video description so you guys can take a look at it. You can save it. You can play around with it. Maybe you can make the build even better. The one thing that I'm concerned about is just the change to the lucky hit chance on Tornado. I still think that this template, even taking Earth and Might out of it with Dire Werewolf and Grizzly Rage with Tornado, is going to be a strong build. So anyways, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.